My name is Akwasi Owusu-Bempah. I'm a person. I live in Canada. I'm also a professor at the University of Toronto. I was trained as a criminologist, and I now teach in a department of sociology. In addition to my work as a professor, I hold a number of different positions. I'm a special advisor to the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, where I advise on issues of anti-Black racism. I'm the director of research for the Campaign for Cannabis Amnesty. I'm the race equity lead at the Center on Drug Policy Evaluation, an affiliate scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And last year I sat as a member of Health Canada's expert task force on substance use. So those are kind of the professional things that I do. I'm a dad, a husband, a brother, son, friend of the world. I've called cannabis a gateway drug numerous times, right? Now, the old theory of cannabis as a gateway drug was that cannabis was a gateway to harder drug use, that you'd start on cannabis and then the next thing you know, you'd be snorting cocaine and injecting heroin. And I don't see it that way. I see cannabis as a gateway into the criminal justice system and as a gateway into the criminal justice system for some of our most marginalized populations. Now, thankfully, legalization has reduced the likelihood of people being criminalized for something like possession. But again, there are actually more laws around the cannabis plant now than there were prior to legalization. But young people need to keep exactly that in mind. Cannabis legalization did exactly that. It legalized cannabis, but it didn't legalize all cannabis. And I think this is important. So you still can be charged with possessing what would be called illegal cannabis or unregulated cannabis. Regulated cannabis or cannabis that's been bought from a licensed retailer will have an excise stamp on it. And so that excise stamp signals to authorities, signals to the state that that was produced and sold legally. And so if a young person decides that they want to go out in public with cannabis on them, even though, under federal and provincial laws, they're not able to do so. It would be wise, of course, to have cannabis that's packaged in a container with an excise stamp on it, so that they're violating the fact that a young person is not able to possess cannabis, but not violating the law around possession of unregulated cannabis, for example. And again, back to the last piece around reducing risk of criminalization. Having cannabis in a vehicle, if you're a young person, again, because you're in a confined space, if it's flower, it's going to smell, right? And again, if you get pulled over by the police, that increases the likelihood of the police asking for a search. I still see it now from time to time, although less than I used to, people smoking in their cars. If you get pulled over, there's like a very, very, very slim chance that you're not going to get busted for that, right? Again, because it smells so much. So these are things that people just shouldn't be doing, right? Again, if you're going to use should be done in a sensible manner. What should young people think about in the context of their interactions with the police and that the relation to cannabis? I think knowing your rights is hugely important. I said off the top that I work with an organization called the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and we've actually just released a very comprehensive document, a Know Your Rights guide that went through extensive kind of public and community consultations that will provide an excellent resource for young people who want to understand their rights in the context of their interactions with the police. So again, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, Know Your Rights guide. And I would say that that should be your first point of call to better understand what your rights are when interacting with the police. But I think in thinking about our rights and the police and the rest of the justice system, it's important as well to recognize that there are rights on the books, and then there are the way in which we should exercise our rights in the situation and context that we're in. So how I would exercise my rights in the middle of a busy street at 3 o'clock in the afternoon would be quite different than in an isolated area at 3 o'clock in the morning with nobody else around, right? Because we know that the police do engage sometimes in different forms of misconduct, and simply exercising one's rights may be seen as a sign of disrespect. But if you've done nothing wrong, then the police have, no reason to kind of detain or question you. And so if you're stopped by the police simply walking down the street and they ask you questions, and certainly if they ask to search you, then you're under no obligation to either answer questions or certainly not to subject yourself to a search. And so simply asking the police officer if you're being detained will tell you whether or not the officer plans to detain you. And if they're not detaining you, then you can simply say, well, if you're not detaining me, then I'm going to be on my way. If you have done something wrong, I think it's important to not say anything, right? Certainly not to say anything until you've had the opportunity to consult with a lawyer. And if you're under the age of majority, and even if you're not, perhaps your parents as well, right? Anything that you do say can be used against you. You hear that on TV all the time, and it is very true. And the police officer may be acting in a friendly manner. They may be saying, just tell me what you were doing, and then I'll let you go. And they may be misleading you. So if you have done something wrong, and you are stopped, questioned, and potentially arrested by the police, I think it's, again, important to be quiet and to wait until you've had an opportunity to consult with counsel, a lawyer, or your parents. There are, of course, for young people who don't have the ability to hire a lawyer themselves, in terms of having the finances to do so, a number of ways in which you can be represented by legal counsel. And again, resources like the Canadian Civil Liberties Association or other community legal groups or centers can help with that too. Let me tell a story about what I know about how you treat the police and how the police are likely to treat you based on how you've treated them. So the highest mark that I ever got on a paper while I was in university was a paper that I wrote entitled "Fuck the Police." And I, broke down the lyrics of NWA's quite famous song, "Fuck the Police." And I contrasted those lyrics with what the research literature said about young Black men's experiences with the police. And one of the things we know is that when people are disrespectful of the police, they're much less likely to be treated positively by those officers. So what I mean is the police are more likely to be lenient, more likely to give you a break, more likely to treat you well if you're respectful of them. And the opposite is also true. The more disrespectful you are of the police, the more rude, the more hostile, the less you cooperate, the less likely they are to give you a break, the more likely they are to give you a hard time, to be disrespectful, and to arrest you. The less likely you are to benefit from what we would call positive police discretion. So positive demeanor equals better treatment, negative demeanor equals negative treatment. So what I want people to think about, and this is a very long-winded way of saying this, especially if you've done something wrong, but even if you haven't, you don't, again, necessarily need to comply with a request for a search, or to go along a line of questioning. But the more respectful you are of the police, right, the more you show deference, the more likely you are to be given a break, the less likely you are to be further questioned or searched or anything like that, right? So the police play a game in the way in which they question people and the approach that they take. And I think it's important to understand how those games are played, right? So that people can arm themselves in a way that they can play those games themselves too. So if you're thinking about your interactions with the police in the context of possession of cannabis or any other kind of behaviors that may get yourself into trouble, again, this is not to condone those behaviors, but only to recognize that a certain proportion of the population are going to engage in them. I think it's important as well to recognize how the way in which you interact with the system, the justice system, the police, and the rest of the system is ultimately going to impact upon you.